On Tuesday, March 13th, the Philadelphia 76ers dropped the game to the Indiana Pacers 101-98. They dropped their record to 36-30 on the season. That was 66 games in. That meant there was only 16 games left in the regular season. And sitting in the 8th seed, the Sixers' playoff hopes did not look bad, but they didn't look great. They didn't look great either, simply because of the fact that they were fighting for contention with teams such as Miami and Milwaukee and Detroit and Indiana and Washington, who were slightly ahead of them. But 36-30 wasn't this plateau that we had hoped the Sixers would achieve. Now, they only won 28-29 games last year, and a 7-win increase 66 games in was a beautiful sight to see. It meant progress. But it wasn't exactly where a lot of fans had hoped the Sixers would be 66 games into the year. Now, let's flash ahead to 80 games into the season with 2 remaining coming up later this week. The Sixers are 50-30 because the Sixers have racked off 14 consecutive wins, the second most, or the most, I should say, tied for the most in franchise history with a team that, 1983, what'd they do? They just won the NBA Finals. So you're looking at comparing this team with a historical Sixers team that won 14 in a row on their way to an NBA Finals championship win. A team that touted 5 Hall of Famers now that Maurice Cheeks is going to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. So put that into perspective, and now all of a sudden, a 21-win increase is a huge margin of success in 2017. Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to another Trust the Podcast episode. I'm your host, Tyler Zulli. Thank you for your patience and for bearing with me. I know it has been a long time since I've been able to put out a podcast. Work has been a little bit hectic. Personal life has been a little bit hectic as well, just trying to get everything back on track. But if you've stuck around for the last 2 weeks without a podcast and you've come back for this one, thank you so much for joining me once again. It's been a long time since we've talked, and like I mentioned in the little bit of the prequel that I kind of put together, the little opening monologue that I put together, the Sixers have won 14 consecutive games to put their record at 50-30. They are now 1 game ahead of the Cleveland Cavaliers as they sit in the number 3 seed in the Eastern Conference. They can be no worse than the 4 with 2 games to play. They will host a playoff game, or an opening playoff series, round of a playoff series, I should say, the first 2 games in the round, for the first time since 2003. So you're looking at a 15-year gap between the time the Sixers have last been the host team in a playoff round. The last time this team made the playoffs was the year they got bounced by the Boston Celtics in 7 games after, let's call it what it is, being extremely lucky in beating the 1-seeded Chicago Bulls, who lost their best player, Derrick Rose, in a meaningless game in which the Bulls had already conquered the Sixers and gotten ready to go up 2-0 in the series. So this is big news for Philadelphia 76ers fans who have gone through the dreck and the mud and the slop and the overall just poor play that was the initial part of the process that was a 10-win season not that long ago. So over the course of the last 2 years, 3 years I should say, the 76ers have gone from a 10-72 team to a team where at minimum will finish 50-32. And I have told you many, many times, I will bite my tongue and tell you that you were correct when the process comes to fruition. And if you look at this on a gauge, on a meter, that meter's pointing way further to success than it is to failure. Because this team is knocking on the door of a 3 seed a year after winning 29 games. So not only have they increased their win total in each of the last 2 seasons from 10 to 29 to now to a minimum of 50, they are looking at a potential 3 seed in the Eastern Conference. So that kind of brings me to my topic today. You know, everything relates back to the Philadelphia Eagles, after the team wins its first Super Bowl in franchise history, you can't really avoid it. And even if you try to, you kind of subconsciously or indirectly get it back to the Eagles. That's just how it goes. So my question today, and this is what I really want to get to, and unfortunately in a medium like this, I can't get your responses. We can't have calls or anything like that, but I would like to hear from you on Twitter or in the comments section or wherever you can reach me personally. I'd be happy to have a conversation with you, happy to have an argument with you, as long as it is a sports argument and not you're stupid, no, you're stupid. But I'd be happy to have an argument with you if you disagree with me. When we talked about the Eagles earlier in the season, we talked about, do your expectations change as the season progresses? I looked at the Eagles in August and in the beginning of September, and I said that this team, with the talent that they have and the improvements of Carson Wentz and how they kind of added on the offense and brought some pieces in here and there defensively, the cornerbacks were still an issue. This team probably will max out at 9 wins. I think that they're very fairly an 8-8 team, maybe 9-7. If all things go right, they could be a 10-6 team who win a wild card beneath the Dallas Cowboys. And as the season progressed, and the Eagles were 6-1, 7-1, 8-1, 9-1, 10-1, finished 13-3, even without Carson Wentz, we discussed, do your expectations change as the season progressed, which I think for a lot of people they did, and then we discussed, do your expectations change now that it was Nick Foles' team instead of Carson Wentz's team? We discussed if the Eagles were to beat Atlanta in the first round, or in the second round, I should say, after the bye, and fall to Minnesota, who defensively was a better team than the Eagles' offense, would you consider it a successful season? If the Eagles made it to the Super Bowl and lost to New England, would it be a successful season? Or would it have to be the Eagles winning the Super Bowl for your eyes to say, this was a great year? Because at the beginning of the year, you probably would have said, hey, if they win 10 games and get a wild card berth, maybe win a game, steal a game on the road in the wild card, I'll take it as a successful season. But as the year progressed and you went, wow, this team is good. This team can play. And they were 10-1. 10-1 doesn't give way to losing in the first round or losing in the divisional round. It really almost doesn't even give way to losing in the NFC title game. So for me, it was a mandatory get to the Super Bowl for it to be a successful year. And then when they got to the Super Bowl, it was a mandatory, they've got to win this game. And you guys know I didn't pick them to win the Super Bowl. I picked the Patriots. And I'm happy I'm wrong. And again, just like with the process, I ate crow with the Eagles winning the Super Bowl without me picking them. But you have to look at it and say, in this particular moment, the Eagles need to get to X. The Eagles need to get to Y. The Eagles need to win the Super Bowl. So do you have that same mindset with the Sixers? Because if you think about it, Joel Embiid and Carson Wentz's injuries were pretty fairly at the same time in the regular season. Now, Joel Embiid is not a torn ACL, torn MCL, whatever went along in Carson's knee. It's a broken orbital bone. We know that he's likely not going to come back for the regular season, but there's a possibility that he's ready to play in the playoffs. But you look at the two teams and how eerily similar they were to each other at the beginning of the year and then towards the end of the regular season. When I said at the beginning of the year who would make the playoffs out of the Eastern Conference, I didn't include the 76ers. I said that there would be improvement, and I said that Ben Simmons and Markelle Fultz and Joel Embiid all together would make for an improved team. Add J.J. Redick to the mix, and you finally got your veteran shooter. This is going to be a better team. And this is a team that could get at 40 wins. And for me, a jump from 29 to 40 was a successful season. If they went from 29 to 40 and 42 and just missed out on the playoffs, finished where Detroit's going to end up finishing, I thought that was going to be a remarkably successful improvement. just as I thought, the Eagles going from 7-9 to 9-7, because in the grand scheme of things, each of those 16 games is in under a much larger and intense microscope than 82 games are, or 162 in the case of the Major League Baseball. I thought a 2-win improvement for the Eagles was successful. A 3-win improvement for the Eagles likely meant a playoff berth, and that was wildly successful. So for me with the Sixers, 40-42 was a successful season. 42-40 or 43-39 or any kind of combination that got you close to the playoffs was a successful year. Now, what I didn't take into account was Indiana being far better than what they were, and a couple of teams not being nearly as good as what I thought they were going to be. When I set out in the beginning of the season and said, here are the 8 teams that are going to make the playoffs out of the Eastern Conference, I thought there were 4 guaranteed locks. I thought your locks were Boston, Cleveland, Toronto, and Washington. Because of the talent that Washington has, I thought that all 4 of those teams were certifiable locks to make the Eastern Conference. So for me, there were 6 teams that were going to take 4 playoff spots. And for me, those teams were, first I'll start with the 4 teams that are going to make the playoffs. Those teams, I should say that there were 5 teams that were going to get 4 spots, because like I said, I did not feel that Indiana was going to be this good. So for me, there were 5 teams that could claim a playoff spot. And those 5 teams were the Miami Heat, the Milwaukee Bucks, the Charlotte Hornets, the Detroit Pistons, and the Sixers. And if the Sixers had made the playoffs as an 8 seed, I probably would have said, my prediction wasn't all that far off. But what I did not factor in was Nicholas Batum being hurt for the beginning of the season, and the Hornets, who, by the way, have a very talented roster. If you take a look at that team, the addition of Nicholas Batum, add with the fact that Kemba Walker is a dangerous scorer, you bring Dwight Howard in. Even a shadow of Dwight Howard, on the days that he wants to play, he's Superman of old. He is Orlando Dwight Howard. We saw it a few weeks ago. Despite the fact that the Sixers beat the Hornets, Dwight Howard dropped 30 on Joel Embiid. So I thought that Hornets team was going to be significantly better than what they were. Then I looked at Detroit, and I saw Detroit, and I said, this is a team that has the makings of a sleeper. Reggie Jackson has a lot of talent. I like Andre Drummond down low, despite the fact that he can be lazy at times, just like Dwight Howard. I thought it could be a sleeper. And then they added Blake Griffin. And I thought, you know what? This is a team that can make some noise in the playoffs if they get in. And it hasn't worked for them. So instead of the Charlotte Hornets and the Detroit Pistons, it is the Indiana Pacers and your 76ers. So you look at it and you go, Tyler, you said 40 wins was a good season. 29-40 is extremely successful. Now the Sixers are in the playoffs. And not only are they in the playoffs, they've clinched a home court advantage in the first series. The worst they can be is the 4 seed. So do you change your expectations to match what you see on the court? To match the fact that the Sixers have not lost in almost a month. This podcast is being recorded on Monday, April 9th. If the Sixers are able to defeat the Atlanta Hawks on Tuesday the 10th and the Milwaukee Bucks on Wednesday the 11th, they'll go into the playoffs having not lost in a month's time, having won 16 consecutive games, which would be a franchise record. They would be 52-30. They would be the 3 seed. Because at this point, all it takes for the Sixers to clinch the 3 seed is 2 wins or 1 Cleveland loss and 1 win. Because the Sixers are a full game ahead of the Cavaliers, each with 2 to play. As mentioned, the Sixers play the Hawks on Tuesday and the Bucks on Wednesday. And the Cavaliers have 2 games with the New York Knicks. So if the Sixers win 2, they get the 3 seed. If the Sixers win 1 and Cleveland loses 1, they get the 3 seed. If for some reason they don't get the 3 seed, well, they'll be the 4 seed. So do your expectations change now that you've seen what the Sixers actually are, you see the fact that the Sixers are a viable Eastern Conference foe for every team in the Eastern Conference playoffs. Because let's be real, the Boston Celtics are fading fast. Kyrie Irving will not return for the playoffs. They haven't had Gordon Hayward all year. Marcus Smart's now banged up. Marcus Morris is banged up. It's a team that is not fully healthy. Do they have the talent? Absolutely. But they're fading fast. And I think the league knows it. And I think the Celtics know it. So you look at the Celtics in the 2 seed, and you go, if the Sixers get out of the first round, that's a team that they can beat. Can they beat Toronto in 7? I'm not quite sure yet. Could they beat Cleveland in 7? I think they could. But look at the back end. Look at the 4 teams that the Sixers have a shot at playing. The Indiana Pacers, the Miami Heat, the Milwaukee Bucks, the Washington Wizards. So a second question comes into the fold, and as I wrap things up, I'll answer my expectation question. And like I said, I'd like for you to comment below on the YouTube channel or on Philly Sports Network. Also, you can hit me up on Twitter at TZULL34. Let me know what you think about that. And I'll answer that expectation question as this first segment comes to an end. But let's take a look at the 4 teams that the Sixers may have a shot at playing. I'll ask a second question here. Is there a team that bothers you more than the other 4? And conversely, is there a team that you would like to see the Sixers play in the first round? Because for me, it comes down to with Joel Embiid, without Joel Embiid. Because I think the answer is different. With Joel Embiid, the team that I would not want to see the most in the first round is the Miami Heat. Because the Heat have talent. And Dwayne Wade seems to be resurgent Dwayne Wade, like killer Dwayne Wade. 2003, 2004, 2005 Dwayne Wade, when the Sixers play the Heat. And I don't believe that Amir Johnson could stand firm with Hassan Whiteside. For a spell he could, but I don't believe that Amir Johnson could stand firm with Hassan Whiteside, and I don't believe Richaun Holmes could either. Holmes could give him some fits offensively. Johnson could do decently defensively, but on the flip side, either or, you're losing that battle. So for me, without Joel Embiid for an extended period of time, I would not want to see the Miami Heat. They trouble me. And I think that would be a very tough, drag down, knockout, blue blood type series that would come down to, if Joel Embiid can get back healthy, can he beat up Hassan Whiteside? And if he's not, can the other 2 Sixers centers, along with Ersan Ilyasova and Dario Saric, contain Hassan Whiteside enough to make it a doable matchup? Now, on the flip side, if the Sixers do have Joel Embiid for some or most of the series, Miami doesn't worry me as much because I think Embiid neutralizes Whiteside, and then your matchups look good. Then your matchups are James Johnson versus Dario, Dwayne Wade versus J.J. Redick, and I'm okay with a lot of those matchups because I don't think the Heat have enough defensive presence to cover everybody that the Sixers have, especially when you sub out J.J. Redick, a sharpshooter, for Marco Bellinelli, another sharpshooter. You get Ersan Ilyasova in the game who can knock down a couple of threes from the perimeter and then go play the 4 defensively. I don't think the Heat match up with the Sixers well when Joel Embiid plays. But should Joel Embiid play, the team that concerns me the most is the Washington Wizards. Just simply because of their outright talent. And I mentioned it earlier in the segment when I was talking about teams that I thought were locks for the playoffs. But take a listen to the backcourt of John Wall and Bradley Beal is devastating to every team. Even if John Wall is not 100%, those 2 will cause issues for every team on the court. Kelly Oubre is also an issue that I find concern with because he comes off the bench, the shooter out of Kansas. He comes off the bench and causes matchup mismatches on the floor based on his length and height, and he can knock down the three. You saw it the last time these two teams met up. I mean, we know that Washington didn't miss that night that the two played down in Washington, but when Oubre's on the court, a lot of times he's going up against the backup two, and Bellinelli, we saw, is not the greatest defender in the world. He's a little bit slow off the dribble. He's a little bit slow to the step. So Oubre worries me. And then a guy like Marcin Gortat, who is physical down low with Joel Embiid, who could beat Embiid up a little bit and kind of take him out of the game. Not to say he's going to stop Embiid or not to say that he's better than Embiid. But I think he could beat up Embiid a little bit because he plays so physically down low that it's a push Joel Embiid to the top of the key and make him shoot threes kind of series. So Miami worries me without Embiid. Washington worries me the most with Embiid. I don't think, regardless of who the Sixers play, that the Sixers are one and done. I don't think that they're done in the first round. I think you're going to see the 76ers at least get into the Eastern Conference semifinals because they're too talented to be denied otherwise. Could they lose a 7-game series to Washington? Sure. Could they lose a 7-game series to Indiana? I think so too. But I don't think that there is a team that's going to wipe the floor with the Sixers. Should the Sixers fall in the first round, I would almost guarantee it will be 7 games. Unless Joel Embiid cannot play for any of the games in the first round. Then there may be some cause for concern. We'll get to that bridge when we have to cross it. But let me answer that question that I proposed early in the segment as we wrap up this first segment. Do your expectations of the Sixers change? Because I've heard a lot of people go from, well, the Sixers could be an 8 seed to the Sixers should win the NBA Finals. And I have to backtrack a little bit and slow your roll just a little bit because, first of all, I don't know if the Sixers get out of the Eastern Conference this season. And if they do, you mean to tell me that the Sixers could knock down Golden State or knock down Houston in the playoffs, in the championship, the NBA Finals, and even in the 7-game series? I don't think so. But do your expectations change to the point where you say, I need to see the Sixers in at least the semifinals. I need to see the Sixers in the Eastern Conference Finals. For me, those expectations don't change the way that the Eagles' expectations changed. Because for me, this is a learning process for the Sixers. And you guys know me. I'm not one to go out and say, well, if they lose, no big deal. Because I'm for winning all the time, which is why I didn't like the process. But in this situation, how many players on the Sixers roster have legitimate playoff experience? That number's not very high. And your core, they've all played 0 playoff games, with the exception of J.J. Redick. Ben Simmons, none. Joel Embiid, none. Dario Saric, none. Robert Covington, none. Markelle Fultz, none. Now, Bellinelli and Ilyasova have that veteran experience that can kind of help a little bit, but they're coming off the bench. They're not in the game to begin the game. So, if they fall in the first round, I would be shocked. But anything after a first-round series win, I think is an added bonus for the Sixers. Because when you get down to the final 4 teams in the Eastern Conference, let's say all 4 teams win, and you've got Toronto, Boston, the Sixers, and the Cavs. If the Sixers play Boston, like I said, I think that they could go to the Eastern Conference Finals. If the Sixers end up having to play Toronto, an Eastern Conference semifinals appearance isn't terrible for a team that won 29 games last year and 10 2 years ago. It's improvement over time. Now, let's just take it one series at a time and see. Maybe my mindset is like this because I'm not as gung-ho on the Sixers as I am on the Eagles. Maybe my mindset is not like this because the Eagles only had to win 1 game each round in order to go to the next series. Whereas the Sixers would have to win 4 every time they took a trip to the court against a specific team. if they win the first round and they play Boston in the second, we'll talk about expectations again. Then I think they change. But if it's Toronto, if it's Cleveland somehow, you have to talk about maybe tampering your expectations just a little bit because of the total lack of experience in the playoffs, especially into the deeper part of the playoffs. But we'll see as the playoffs progress. One thing I do know is that the Philadelphia 76ers will host the first two games of the first round for the first time since 2003. We'll take a quick break. On the other side, we'll flip gears. We'll get into Flyers playoff hockey because that's right, the Philadelphia Flyers are also a playoff team as well. So we'll dive into that, the goaltending situation, and do they have a chance against a team that swept them in the regular season, scoring 4 goals or more each time the Flyers and the Pittsburgh Penguins hit the ice at the same time. We'll get into that Keystone State rivalry and much more. Thanks for hanging out. This is Trust the Podcast. Thanks for coming back and hanging out with me on this episode of Trust the Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Zulli. And thanks so much for checking out Philly Sports Network, everything that you can find on everything that you need to find about Philadelphia sports, from the draft coming up with the Philadelphia Eagles, the beginning of the Philadelphia Phillies season. We've got some hot water in the dugout and in the clubhouse already this season. Check out the Union page. They've kicked off and have had a tremendous start to their 2018 season. And the Flyers and the 76ers are both headed to their respected playoffs. So we talked about the Sixers in the previous segment. Let's get into the Philadelphia Flyers for just a little bit, because I've always said to you I will not talk out of my you-know-what and pretend like I know things that I don't know about. And when it comes to the NHL, I'm simply not as well-versed as many of some of our guys are, as some of the NHL lifers are. It's just not in my DNA. I've always been a baseball and football guy first, but I'll give you what I've got, and that way at least we can have a conversation about it, and you don't go, well, Tyler, the Flyers made the playoffs too. Why haven't you spoken about them? Well, here we go. Let's talk some Flyers hockey as they get set to take on the Pittsburgh Penguins. And it seems like every year the Flyers make the playoffs, at some point they run into Pittsburgh. Now, obviously, the last time the Flyers made the playoffs, they lost to the Washington Capitals in 7 games, lost the first 3, then won 3 in a row. Excuse me, I should say, I believe it was 6. I apologize. And here you go. There's a prime example of me probably should have done a little bit more research than what I did. But regardless of what it was, they won a couple in a row. I think they won 2 in a row to make it 3-2, and then lost in Game 6. But it seems like almost every time the Flyers make the playoffs, there's something standing in their way, and that is their Pennsylvania in-state rival, the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, the Penguins finished the season with 100 points on the nose, 47, 29, and 6, which ironically enough is only 2 points better than what the Flyers finished with, who finished 42, 26, and 14 to finish with 98 points on the regular season. The Flyers actually gave up less goals than the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Penguins gave up 250 goals this year, the Flyers 243, but the Penguins scored 21 more goals. They put up 272, where the Flyers put up 251. So the goal differential is 22 for the Penguins and 8 for the Flyers. It makes it feel like the Penguins are a far superior team than the Philadelphia Flyers, and they may be. And on paper, if you think about it, if you match these two teams up, it is the Penguins that are the better team. But what you really get into in this series for me is goaltending. Because the Philadelphia fans and everybody, I think even national pundits, have kind of forced it down our throats that the Flyers goaltending has not been very good this year, which at times has been true. Because it's been a rotating panel and rotating door of goaltenders. You know, you've seen Brian Elliott have success. You've seen Brian Elliott give up 4 goals on 9 shots. You've seen Michael Neuwirth have success. You've seen Michael Neuwirth be injured 3 separate times this year. You've seen Alex Lyon have a little bit of success. You've also seen him be a rookie goaltender. You've seen Peter Mrazek have some success. You've also seen where it looks like he couldn't stop a beach ball from going in the back of the net. So you have this rotating panel of goalies that really isn't settled in. And at the end of the day, we know, or at least we know for the time being, that it's going to be Brian Elliott in net to start Game 1. That is what we assume to be a foregone conclusion. Brian Elliott starts Game 1 Wednesday night in Pittsburgh at PPG Paints Arena or Console Energy or whatever it's called nowadays, the place that the Philadelphia Flyers have had tremendous success in over the last couple of years, especially come playoff time. Because if you go back to that 2012 series, the last time the two teams met up in the playoffs, which is remarkable to think about, but the last time these two teams met up in the NHL playoffs, if you were to say who's the better team, I would venture a guess, and I don't think it's a guess. I would strictly say it's the Pittsburgh Penguins. But you saw what happened when the Penguins and the Flyers met up in 2012, and each team started scoring 5 and 6 goals a night. Because when you score 5 and 6 goals a night, you should never lose. But yet each team was being susceptible to giving up 5 goals, scoring 4, but giving up 5 and losing a game. So when the tides turn into an offensive slugfest, that's not something you want to get into with a team like Pittsburgh, who has so much talent and so much depth. But it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world for a team like the Flyers. You're simply going to need another guy or two to step up that have been kind of second-tier players this year. So you look at the first tier, and we'll get back to the goaltender situation in a second because I really want to spotlight Elliott versus Matt Murray. You look at the first tier of Philadelphia Flyers players. On that line, obviously, led by Claude Giroux, his first 100-point season in his NHL career, his first regular season hat trick in the game against the New York Rangers, the final game of the regular season to put the Flyers into the playoffs. He's clearly option 1. And then you've got a couple of guys underneath that are option 2 and 2B and maybe 2C, and that's Jake Voracek, Sean Couturier, and Travis Konechny. And those three guys are going to have to be your secondary scoring to a definition. But your secondary scoring is going to have to be guys that you're not used to getting secondary scoring from. And it's not guys like Nolan Patrick who have emerged as much better players as the season progresses. You've seen the progression that Nolan Patrick has made over the last 82 games. It's been tremendous. He's in the right spot more. He's hitting the right passes and connecting with his teammates more. And he's in the right spot to jam that goal into the net. Kind of playing that smaller Wayne Simmons role when he needs to. And then you see the filthy moves that he puts on with some of the dangles that he's able to put on some other defenders simply because he's younger and more athletic and faster than a lot of these defenders. So I'm not talking about a guy like Nolan Patrick. I need to see secondary scoring from a guy, maybe even a young guy like Oscar Lindblom, who has done everything right, everything that's been asked of him in his time as a Flyer, and he finally was able to get on the scoreboard and in the stat sheet a little bit after 15 games without a point. You need to get secondary scoring from a guy like Lindblom. You need to get secondary scoring from a guy like Wayne Simmons, which is odd to think that Wayne Simmons is a secondary option, but with all the injuries he's been battling this year, and statistically, Wayne Simmons is a secondary option. So you have to get scoring from a guy like Wayne Simmons. You have to get it from a guy like Oscar Lindblom. You're going to get very little offensively from guys like Val Filppula, Jori Lehtera, Matt Reed. It's just how it is. But you have to get your secondary scoring from guys that aren't your top-tier scorers in order to keep up with a team like Pittsburgh. So if you get into that slugfest kind of series with the Penguins, I think anything can happen. But like I said, this really comes down to goaltending. And it's been highlighted that the Flyers' goaltending has not been very good, but on the flip side, Matt Murray has not been all that good this year for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Let's take a look at some of his stats for the season. He started 45 games this year. He's 27, 16, and 3. With a .292 goals against average and a 90 save percentage. He had one shutout this entire season. Every single one of those numbers are down in his NHL career. His goals against average is up, which is what you want to see if you're a Flyers fan. His goals against average is up by almost or over 0.3 of a goal per game, closing in on 0.4 of a goal per game. Which, you know, if you're your casual Flyers fan, you're not a hockey guy. 0.3 of a goal, it doesn't sound like that much, but if you factor in 0.3 of a goal over 45 games played, you end up getting an additional 11, 12, 13 goals a season that Matt Murray's allowed. A 90 save percentage, which in his career is a 1/10 of a percentage point, or I should say is 10% less than what he's used to making, or again, 1/10 of a percentage point, that was correct, 1.7 less than what he normally makes. So he makes saves at a 91% clip. This year he's making them at a 90% clip. So again, while one goal doesn't seem like a lot, you have to take into consideration the goals over the span of the season. And that's where those extra goals come in. Matt Murray's been human over his last 5 games. We'll go back for his last 5 games. He's gone up against Columbus, Washington, Montreal, the Devils, and the Detroit Red Wings. Now, granted, you do have 3 playoff teams in there. But this is what he's done over his last 5 starts. He is 3-2. But he's given up 4 against Columbus, 3 to Washington, 2 to Montreal, 3 to the Devils, and 4 to the Red Wings. So with 2 4s, that's 8. 2 3s, that's 6. That's 14. And add another 2 is 16. That's 16 goals over the last 5 games. 3.2 goals against per game average. That's human. That is very, very human. And if the Flyers can score upwards of 3 goals per game, you're going to get a series out of this 7-game series. Save percentages of 86, 91, 92, 90, and 84. Now, on the day that he gave up 2 against the Montreal Canadiens, he stopped 24 of 26 shots. He played really well. I mean, he played extremely well. But 16 goals in 5 games suggests to you that Matt Murray is, in fact, human. And that is how the Flyers go about beating a guy like Matt Murray when the Pittsburgh Penguins, on paper, are a better hockey team. I don't buy in to the anything can happen once you get into the playoffs formula in every other sport. Sure, one game could go one way or the other in the NFL. You ride a hot bullpen or you ride a hot starting rotation for 5 games and you steal a series in baseball. Derrick Rose goes down and the 8-seeded Sixers beat the 1-seeded Chicago Bulls. Things happen, but I don't buy into anything could happen because in reality, anything can't happen. I understand, yes, realistically, anything could happen. There are an infinite amount of different outcomes that could happen in a series that lead to a 4, 5, 6, or 7-game series in which one team or the other wins or one team or the other loses. But in the NHL, that saying anything can happen is very, very prevalent. Because we've seen time and time again 7 and 8 seeds get hot, get into the playoffs, make deep runs. Take a look at the LA Kings. They won the Cup as an 8 seed. Take a look at the Nashville Predators last year. They went to the Cup as an 8 seed. The 2010 Eastern Conference Finals in which the Flyers won, the Flyers were the 7 seed, and they had home ice advantage. because it was the Montreal Canadiens as the 8th seed who faced them. And the Canadiens knocked off the 1 and the 2 seed on their way there. Or the 1 and the 3 seed, I should say, on their way there. Because at the end of the first round of that 2010 NHL playoffs, the only teams left were the 3, 4, 7, and 8. And we know what happened in Boston against the Bruins in that Game 7. We know that the Montreal Canadiens beat the 3 seed to get to the Eastern Conference Finals. We know that the Flyers and Canadiens battled it out, and the 7 seed went to the Cup. And they took the beginning of a Blackhawks dynasty to 6 games. And if it weren't for the fact that Michael Leighton was a terrible goaltender and the Flyers had anybody else, go back over the course of the last 7 years and look at the Flyers' goaltending list after Michael Leighton. And go through them all and say, this guy would have won the Cup, this guy would have not won the Cup. I don't play in hypotheticals, but this is one that has always kind of resonated with me, especially as the years go on. And now we're 8 years away from the last time the Flyers made the Cup. Go back through the archives of Flyers goalies since that time and really do it fairly. Don't say, well, I hated Ilya Bryzgalov, he wouldn't have done it. Because he may have. If it was his first season as a Flyer. Would Bryzgalov have done it? Would Steve Mason have done it? Would Sergei Bobrovsky have done it? We know that now Sergei Bobrovsky probably would have, but would Flyers Sergei Bobrovsky have done it? Would Michael Neuvirth have done it? Would Brian Elliott have done it? Would Ray Emery have done it? Think about the guys and tally that up and say, yes, he would have, no, he wouldn't have. And then look at that 2010 team a little differently. You don't play in hypotheticals, but in the NHL, it kind of seems like you can because the teams are so relatively close. And it's what I started this segment with. The Penguins, who all year had the Flyers' number, swept them in the regular season, scoring at least 4 goals in every single game they played. Only finished with 2 additional points than the Flyers. The Penguins had 100. The Flyers had 98. So think about this and really take a look at how far off the Flyers are from the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Columbus Blue Jackets are from the Washington Capitals. The LA Kings are from the Las Vegas Knights. Are any of those teams that much better than the team that they're playing in the playoffs right now? And I don't know if you could come up with a definitive yes answer. Is Las Vegas really that much better than the Kings? Are the Flyers that much worse than the Pittsburgh Penguins? That is how you can justify picking the Flyers in a first-round matchup against Pittsburgh. I don't want you to say, well, the Flyers have the Penguins' number come playoff time, because the last time those two teams met was 6 years ago. Those guys aren't on the team anymore. Sure, your mainstays are Claude Giroux is, and guys like Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin are. But the goaltenders aren't the same. Marc-Andre Fleury's in Las Vegas. So think about that. That's how you can justify picking the Flyers to win a series. Am I going to do it? I'm not going to go out on a limb and do that. But would it surprise me if this series went 6 or 7 games? Not even a little bit. Despite the fact that the Flyers, over the course of 240 minutes of hockey, did not beat the Pittsburgh Penguins once. So would it shock me if they won this series? A little bit. But would it surprise me if they took it to 6 or 7? Not in the slightest. Let's step aside and take another break. On the other side, we'll get to some Phillies baseball. We'll talk Gabe Kapler and the mismanagement that we've seen over the first week and a half of the regular season. We'll get to Nick Williams' comments and much more. Thanks for hanging out with us. This is Trust the Podcast. I know that we're extremely passionate here in Philadelphia, and there is a mantra about Philadelphia fans and the city and the people that live here that is extremely negative and unnecessary because of the fact that people outside the city don't understand the passion for this city and this city's sports teams especially, and how people in this city, a lot of very hardworking people, live and breathe with their sports teams. You work 5-6 days a week, and you come home, you want to watch your teams play, you want to watch your teams succeed, because it's an outlet away from your everyday life. But I never expected a fan base to want to fire a manager less than 10 games into his managerial career. And I never expected to be a part of a fan base. I shouldn't say a fan base, to be a part of a pitchfork crowd that wanted to fire a manager less than 10 games into his managerial career. But here we sit with the Phillies 4-5, and many of you, myself included, want to see the end of Gabe Kapler already. Whether it is Kapler and his macho look, or it's Kapler and his analytical feel, there's something that perturbs you about the Phillies' new manager, and I don't think it was justifiable until the regular season started. But now it is very extremely justifiable because of the fact that you look at what's gone on over the course of the first couple of games, and you're unhappy. How analytics have gotten in the way of Gabe Kapler and the Phillies winning a few games, and instead of being 4-5, maybe being 6-3. And I know that it's 9 games into a 162-game schedule, and they're not going to fire the guy after 9 games because you're not even a 16th into the season. You're not even 6% into the regular season. But what I do know is that Gabe Kapler has to come up with a middle ground that was not met in the first few games, that is somewhere between his analytical mind and the regular baseball that much of Philadelphia is yearning for. I know that Gabe Kapler is brilliant when it comes to the game of baseball. I will never deny the man his unflappable, I shouldn't say unfallible, but his brilliance when it comes to managing the game of baseball. Because he is extremely intelligent about the game, the ins and outs, the analytical behaviors of the game. I've got no issue with that. What I do have a problem with is the fact that, as I've written several times already, we're on this Chip Kelly-like log flume, and I already want to get off. Because just like I've written, we know what a log flume dictates. We know that a log flume ends in you getting wet. And you walking around whatever park you're in for the remainder of the day, miserable and wet and uncomfortable with wet socks and shoes, which, by the way, is the worst thing ever. And then you're no better off for it the rest of the day. So I want to get off this log flume before we depart from the station, or I want to see the log flume become a roller coaster. Because I don't mind ups and downs. Over the course of a 162-game season, a manager is going to mismanage games. Players are going to blow games. Leads are going to be surrendered by bullpens after a good start from your starting pitcher. Starting pitchers are not going to pitch well, and the team is going to lose by 5. Your team is not going to hit the ball in a certain night off a certain pitcher whose curveball is effective that day. It happens. It's how baseball goes. It's why teams don't win 162 games. It's why the most ever is 120. Or in the 116. It's 116, I believe. So I'm not ready to say that this man is an utter failure, like some people already are claiming he is. However, I do need to see a different set of thought go into some of these games and not just be a numbers guy, not just be an analytics guy, not just be, well, the computer says this, so we're going for it. Because you can tell when it happened to Doug Peterson at the beginning of the season, and fans went crazy when he went for it on 4th and 8, he changed his game. And the fans embraced him for it. And I know that you will do the same if Gabe Kapler changes his analytical approach to be somewhere in the middle. Because for 100+ years, baseball was played because baseball was a feel game, and you brought in a guy or you left a guy in because you felt that he was capable of doing what you needed him to do to get the particular out or get a particular hit in a particular spot. That is how the game of baseball is played. But I am also one of those people that has to encompass the times. You have to roll with the times. This is 2018. Computers help teams win games. Tablets help pitchers know tendencies of hitters while they're sitting in the dugout waiting to go back to the mound in the other half of the inning. And you know, just like you've known for 100 years, who the first 3 guys were going to be up, because you know how lineups work. You know who is coming up in what particular spot and how you're going to attack him. And that in and of itself is a beautiful thing. Because if you are able to look at a tablet over the course of a half an inning in which your team is hitting and go, hitter X does not like the curveball away. When he gets 2 strikes, he goes flailing. Then you're going to throw him a curveball away with 2 strikes because you know that that's how the game works. And in that sense, analytics help you. In that sense, the BABIP comes in where it says that in the 7th inning, the 3rd time through the order, Freddie Freeman has better success against Aaron Nola than Hobie Milner does. I'm okay with that. What I'm not okay with is pulling your pitcher after 68 pitches when he is cruising. That is where the issue lies. If you want to say to me that Aaron Nola's success rate the 3rd time through the lineup is not very good, and Hobie Milner has numbers that prove he has been productive against Freddie Freeman, then I'm perfectly okay with that. But if you want to say to me that computer this, blah, 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 and I'm pulling Aaron Nola after 68 pitches of one-hit ball, then we have an issue. Because a lot of your fans are looking at this and saying, you're doing this wrong. You're looking strictly at the computer, and the computer is going to leave you in a pitfall. Which is not true. Which is not the case all the time. But I will say this. You have to be extremely careful with the computers because they are computers. They don't have feel. They don't have regular intelligence. They don't have a knack for the game. They don't have emotions. You have to manage with a certain amount of emotion. You can't be over-emotional because you end up like a manager like Ozzie Guillen, who just threw things and got ejected every other week. But you can't be so computer with your mind just going beep, boop, beep, that you have no feel for the game itself. So Gabe Kapler, 9 games into the regular season, you are 4-5. You are not in a bad spot right now. Your team is not that bad. It's significantly better than what it was last season. Just find some kind of middle ground to fall upon so that the fans get off your back for a little bit, so that we as writers get off your back for a little bit, so Tyler Zulli can stop doing segments about log flumes for a little bit. And that's all we ask of you, is to find some kind of middle ground to manage as a guy that is both intelligent and emotional. As Doug Peterson said, emotional intelligence. Have some of it, and you will be perfectly fine in this city. You don't have a team right now that is built to make a deep playoff run. But what you do have is a team that, if managed correctly on most nights, will at least be fun to watch once more. It's been far too long since this city has had fun baseball to watch. And you have an ability to usher in the new era of fun baseball in order to see results in the near future. That's all we ask. We don't ask for a World Series this year. We're not that crazy. We understand that this team is not ready to make that deep playoff run. All we ask of you is to find it somewhere in your aviating-wearing mind to just get in the middle. That'll do it for today's show. Thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks so much for tuning in. As always, if you listen to any or all of our shows, you can find us. If you found us on YouTube, give us a like, a comment, and a subscribe down below. You can talk to me about Gabe Kapler. You can talk to me about the Flyers' playoff chances. You can talk to me about your expectations for the Sixers and have they changed now that the Sixers are on a 14-game winning streak. You can do that all in the comment section below. You can also find us on PhillySportsNetwork.com. You'll find a list of great writers who really know what they're doing in their particular sport. They are very, very into one sport or another, whether it's our Flyers team, our Union team, our Phillies or Eagles or Sixers team. We've got you covered for all of that and much more. You can also find us on iTunes as well, so give us a look up there and download this podcast for free, by the way. You don't have to pay for it at all. You don't have to give me any money. You don't have to give Liam any money. But give us a listen. Hopefully you like it. Thanks so much for tuning in. Until next time, have a great week.